Hey, folks, glad you're here. Today, you're going to meet Hector Mujica, who is the head of economic opportunity for Google.org. And his territory is the Americas, plural. Stick around. It's going to be great fun.
You're listening to The Playful Podcast with Christine Michie. Let's jump right in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Playful Podcast. I am so happy to see my friend Hector Mujica on the screen here today. If you're listening, you're going to hear us. If you're watching, you're going to see us and hear us. And we're having the pleasure of getting to see each other and hear each other right now. So Hector, welcome to today's episode of the Playful Podcast.
Christine, thanks for having me.
Yes, so great. So Hector and I didn't count it up, but I bet we've known each other 5-ish years, something like that.
Sounds right. Yeah.
Definitely pre-COVID. So it's one of those longer relationships.
We go back to BC times. That's right.
Exactly. Awesome. So everybody, Hector is the director of economic opportunity for Google.org. And I'm going to have him explain more what that is. I was thinking, Hector, that we all think we know what Google is, right? Because we use it every day, all of us. And it's an interesting kind of ubiquitous brand and name and term. But within that, we probably can't even imagine all the people doing all the different things. It'll be really fun to hear specifically about the part of Google, Google.org, .org. I think most the folks listening to Playful Podcast know that designation as an organization working in impact. And so for you to tell us about that. But before we do the usual kind of what do you do for a living stuff, I want to ask you, who's the most playful person you know?
Ooh, great question. Fortunately, I think I have a great privilege and joy of being married to one of the most playful people I know. My wife, Tara, is incredibly playful, and I think I've really brought play and bring play and humor into a lot of the spaces that you occupy. And I think it took both someone that knew how to intake it and also dish it back out for us to be able to have worked together for so many years. We've known each other since high school, so we go way, way back. And she definitely has a playful, inquisitive, curious spirit that I think keeps us animated and young and enthusiastic about the world.
I love it. And I love that you are high school sweethearts, or at least you knew each other then. Maybe you weren't sweethearts until later, but that's so fun. And
long story, complicated story, but yes.
Well, growing up with someone to a degree, right? Growing with and alongside someone can be quite playful, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, you get to observe people through many seasons of playfulness in life. And, life brings so many different challenges along the way that I think it's just been a joy to see how we adapt in our playfulness to meet those seasons.
Yeah, I love it. One of the friends of the Playful Podcast is Dr. Steward Brown, who is the foremost play researcher and has been doing this work since 1968. I have told the story before on the podcast, but it bears repeating. There was a mass shooting at UT Austin in the 60s, and that was fairly rare then, which is sad to say how that's changed. And It was so rare that there was a movement, a real serious, significant movement for like, well, how could this have happened? What happened? And Dr. Brown was a young associate professor at the time in psychiatry, and he was tapped to be on what was called the Tower Commission to research how and why could something like this happen. And he ended up developing from the research that he did about that one perpetrator and then other folks that he interviewed who had been involved in violent crime, that play deficit was a big part in their growing up. A play deficit contributed to some of the causality. So that's heavy stuff. Oh gosh, here I go. Let's see how I do on my transition. But
how are you going to bring us out of this one, Christine?
But I guess the good news is that what he then decided to do was to set about for the rest of his career studying how important play is and spreading the word. So he started something called the National Institute for Play. And the reason I broadly bring it up, but specifically right now, is that he developed a theory that there's 8 different play personalities. So play is a general thing, and then there's different kinds of play. I really do feel like that got heavy really fast, but God bless that because it's important. Yeah. So let me tell you the 8 types, and I want to see if you hear yourself and your wife in any of these. Okay. So the first one is joker. Okay. Kind of speaks for itself. The second one is kinesthete, which is rough and tumble physical play. The next one is explorer. Next is director, like the person that wants to put on the play, right? The person who organizes the big road trip. The next one is storyteller. And then the final three, I'll start with a C: competitor, collector, and creator. And I love, for example, on collector, he talks about not just collecting things, but maybe collecting experiences. Someone that loves to travel, for example. So joker, kinesthete, explorer, director, storyteller, competitor, collector, creator. Do you see you and Tara in there?
I see me and Tara all over that spectrum. I don't know that I gravitate to just one of those, but there's so many aspects of play that I see both in a jokester. I think I bring joking and a sense of humor to a lot of the places and spaces that I occupy and the way that I present myself. The sense of curiosity and exploration also resonates. The sense of the director, right? I mean, we often are the ones that are the ringleaders for big group trips or gatherings or holiday parties or just because gathering, and also the sentiment of a collector really resonates, right? I think I've often thought of my life journey as a collection of beautiful moments and like a collection of joyous moments, and I think that one really hits close to home.
I love it. Thanks for that reflection. He does say that most of us have many of these, and depending on the situation, one may most naturally facilitate, what we're trying to accomplish or what's happening in a moment. So I'm gonna take that into asking you about how you bring play into work. And so if you would talk a little bit about what is Google.org, and then a little bit about your role around economic opportunity. And I also noticed as I was looking over some of your resume that you spent some time in the crisis operations part of Google, crisis response.
Yeah.
And I imagine maybe kind of like a minute ago when I talked about heavy, hard things, how do we bring resilience and get it resilient by having some playfulness, even when we're doing really critical and hard stuff. So love to hear if you would tell folks about Google.org, about your role, and then maybe a little example of how play is helpful to you in your role.
Absolutely. Happy to. So Google.org, many folks don't really know that Google has a philanthropic arm or an impact arm, but Google.org inherently is Google's philanthropic arm, really tasked with the responsibility of helping to lead and steward innovation and social impact. So kind of that intersection of technology and impact for the company. And the space that I get to occupy and lead is really thinking about how this translates to economic opportunity and economic mobility across the Americas. So what are the innovative organizations, the innovators that are out there leveraging technology to prepare communities for the reality of an emerging digital economy? And how do we ensure that we are building a digital economy that is inclusive and that is more equitable, that is more just, and that ultimately works for everyone, right? That it's not going to be leaving swaths of the population behind. That includes things like K-12 education and how are we exposing K-12 learners. So, historical underserved communities, how are we exposing them to things like computer science so they can see themselves reflected in the type of jobs that they might not otherwise have exposure to, and how do we equip them with the right tools so that they can explore fields in the digital economy or in tech. It also involves jobs and job seekers. How are we ensuring that people today across the Americas, across the world, that might be displaced, that might be looking for upper mobility, how are we ensuring that these individuals, especially individuals that come from non-traditional backgrounds as we understand them, there's a lot of dimensions we could be looking at that through. It could be a gender lens, it could be a racial lens, it could be a socioeconomic lens, it could be an educational lens. People that don't have a college degree historically have had significant impediments to upper mobility. So how are we ensuring that these folks have the right skill sets and the right background supports to be able to move upwardly into the digital economy? Also thinking about it through the lens of small businesses. And Christine, this reminds me a lot of the work that we got to work on together through Hispanics and Philanthropy, right? We're thinking a lot about themes around access to capital and how do we ensure that historically underserved communities that have lacked access to capital have access to the right tools and the right pools of capital to start a new venture, to start a new small business, to grow, sustain a small business. And, this really, to me, is inherently very personal because I've had the opportunity to see this in my personal life, in the life of my family, the life of my wife's family and our peers, how critical it can be to get access to the right education, the right jobs, and the right pools of capital to sustain growth and to ultimately move up and sustain an economy, right? And build a backbone of an economy in places like the US. And this, of course, is very, very intertwined with other things that I do in my personal capacity, in my personal life. I'm deeply, deeply engaged, and I very much identify with the Latino community. So I serve both nationally and locally in work that helps to bridge and connect Latin America, the US, the Latino community in the US in a more profound and intentional way. That includes the way that you and I met, Christine, through Hispanics and Philanthropy, where I serve on the board. I also serve on the board of the Hispanic Federation, of Aspen's Latino Society program, a handful of organizations that are trying to advance dialogue and to advance the field and to really help to shape how we're thinking of creating an economy and access to an economy that's more equitable and has more opportunity for everyone, including Latinos. And this is kind of the latest iteration of my career. Prior to this, like you alluded to, Christine, I had the joy of helping to build out our crisis and humanitarian work at google.org. And that, in a different way, was incredibly daunting, right? Took me that I got to see the world through that role, got to work with some really, really inspiring organizations in very, very difficult moments. I was in Nepal in 2015 after mass casualty earthquake. I was in Europe in 2016 during the mass influx of Syrian refugees as Europe was trying to grapple with this influx of people that were being displaced through war and other factors. And I think one thing that I think back when I think back to that time in my career, one thing that I always remember is the resilience of the human spirit. That to me was something that was a connecting thread, whether it was in Nepal, whether it was in Greece, whether it was in Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America or in the US itself. Really, the resilience and the commitment to thrive and to push forward is something that I think has always given me great hope and great enthusiasm and really kind of like folds nicely into my personal mission, right? Into the reason of the why behind why I do the work I do. And I recently heard someone use this terminology that really resonated, and I almost have adopted this as a life mantra, which is comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I just found that to be such a powerful way to describe what we can do through movements of justice, what we can do through movements of inclusion, of belonging, of equity, and what we can do through tools like philanthropy. Because at the end of the day, diversity, inclusion, intentionality, justice, and spaces and places of consequence is part of the formula for a more prosperous society, a more equitable society. And that's true across many segments of society, whether it be in business, in jobs, in venture, in philanthropy. Philanthropy being one of those spaces where communities of color get less than 4, maybe 5% of philanthropic resources. Same thing in venture. So again, no wonder that there's such great economic inequality in our society, such limited pathways for upward mobility, which really goes down to the why behind the work that I do, because of that belief that talent and human dignity is equally distributed, but opportunity to really leverage that talent is not. And I want to have the opportunity, when I have the opportunity, to work alongside some of the leading shakers and movers and thought leaders to ensure that they have the resources and the platforms necessary to advance a world that is more equitable and more just. And maybe to quickly bring that all together to the concept and the theme of play is, I think play offers us a window into taking something that's really heavy, something that's really complex and challenging and can be really taxing in us as individuals, and helps us find some balance, find some equilibrium, right? And I think that's incredibly important. And for me, it's something that helps me keep my sights set on kind of the long-term objectives. Another kind of really beautiful quote that I recently heard that I really loved was, long-term planning cannot happen when we're rewarded for short-term gains. And
yeah.
To me, that was also a big realization that I've actually recentered back into the theme of play, which is if we are not keeping an eye on the long-term goal of the why we're doing the work we're doing, and we're just focused on the immediacy and the short-term gains and the short-term rat race, we're going to burn out early. Totally. And our careers are going to ultimately suffer the consequences of not having achieved that equilibrium, that balance. And that's why I think play is such an essential tool in giving ourselves the agency, the freedom, the liberation to rest, to laugh, to find joy, and ultimately to recharge, to, put a little bit more energy in our jetpacks, a little bit more fuel in our jetpacks, so that we can really stay focused on those long-term objectives and help really change the system in the ways that we're aiming to change it.
I love all of that. A few things that came to mind, both from, reading and work I've done and other conversations I've had the privilege to be in recently through the podcast, the humanity of play. In fact, even just the mammalian, like mammals play, right? So the research shows, so Dr. Brown that I mentioned earlier has done a lot of work with Jane Goodall. And so they collaborated around play in animals, and what can we learn about what's so instinctive and instructive about that. So there's the fact that I think about your work all over the world. You're coming from Venezuela. You're working and living in different parts of the U.S. I think I saw that you did some work in Japan. I know you do some work in Canada. Yep. And if I'm right, I think there's 35 countries or so in the Americas broadly. So you've got a big territory, so to speak.
Big scope.
And if we can't find
not just 35 countries, but 35 very diverse countries, right? I mean, if you think about it, socioeconomically, racially, language, culture. There's just such a plethora of complexity.
Don't you need things? Don't you need as many as you can common threads, right? Something that is that way. So is play one of those things that you can grab on going, there will be a chance. And people play differently. I mean, not just those 8 personality types, but play in different cultures can look different. So sensitivity around, what might seem funny or fun to me may or not be fun or funny to someone else. But to believe that we both have a desire to be playful and creative. And the research shows too that play is actually a really strategic thing to do if you're trying to get a group to solve a problem differently than they might have been solving it before. And as you and I working on many long-term problems, as the guests of the podcast all do, if the whole thing about, knocking your head against the wall, trying the same thing and expecting different results. And I'm hoping that conversations around play that I'm getting to be a part of are both giving me a rest to a degree, kind of a little break, and also coming back better, smarter, more effective at the work that, I'm so lucky that I get to do and that we're all doing.
Absolutely.
Together. Yeah. Have you seen play vividly different in different countries and cultures?
I think that to some degree, the way that play manifests itself, I mean, thinking back to those 8 paradigms that you were sharing earlier, I do think some of them probably get elevated more than others in different contexts. But what I will say that is probably a commonly shared trait of play is the outcome of play, right? And the outcome of play being centering in community, centering in proximity, centering in belonging, finding kind of that common denominator that makes people feel included. It makes people
Nice.
feel like they belong and they're part of a whole. And I think that outcome, whether it be competitive play or whether it be, the director play or the creator play or the collective play, I think that the outcome is very much a connecting thread
Yeah,
throughout.
I love that. Just in the last few episodes, I was just thinking as you were speaking, we've had someone working in South Sudan, Syria, Costa Rica, Turkey, and then all over the US. And so I like that, the outcome of play, and isn't ultimately we're seeking some shared outcomes, even if how we get there is through a different certain path. I
Yeah.
love it. I want to ask you a little bit. I think those of us, many people probably think giving away money is a lot of fun. And I wonder what we get right or wrong about that.
Listen, it's a great question and definitely something that I think about often with the context in which I operate, my team operates at Google.org. I think can be incredibly rewarding and it can also be incredibly taxing. And I'll explain what I mean by that, right? Of course, there's rewarding aspects of it. You're helping unlock resources or helping deploy resources for social impact champions that are rooted in the community, that are proximate to communities most in need, that are really grokking with difficult problems and trying to explore and experiment with potential solutions. And that's where philanthropy, I think, performs its best, is where philanthropy can come adjacent to an innovator, can help them, provide them with risk capital, with some of that venture philanthropy capital for them to test out their idea, put them on the platform. And if it sticks, great. Then we find other ways to fund it. We find ways to make it sustainable. And if it doesn't, then what can we learn? What can the ecosystem learn from that opportunity? So either which way is a win-win for the ecosystem, for society as a whole. What I think makes it challenging, and I think also what makes it particularly challenging in one, corporate philanthropy, and two, for people of color or people from underrepresented backgrounds is the following. One, within the context of corporate philanthropy, you're not just delivering against values of impact and doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. That is a driver, but similarly, at the same time, adjacent to that driving value of impact, you also have to be living within the constraints of the entity, the corporation that you're representing, or the corporation that is providing the resourcing for the work you're doing. So in a context like Google.org, of course, we have to keep impact at the forefront, but also keep top of mind that the context in which we're operating, and that of course offers some trade-offs and limitations that we have to always navigate, which can be quite challenging. And the second component around proximity to marginalized groups, I mentioned earlier that an immigrant from Venezuela, I grew up in Miami, but my family moved here when I was very, very young, when I was 8, and had the opportunity to grow up in binational, bilingual context, and that's been really formative. But again, that puts me in a level of marginalization, a level of grouping that's unique, has strengths and also some challenges. Similarly, I identify as a Latino, and was also, again, provides tons of strengths and tons of things that I'm really, really proud of. Also some challenges and barriers that we have to overcome. And I think when I bring that into the fold with the philanthropy that I get to lead and the philanthropy that I get to do on behalf of Google, that creates, again, some challenges in that a lot of the groups I'm hoping to serve, a lot of the groups that the resourcing that I'm trying to unlock is to benefit groups that I personally identify with. And again, that's both rewarding and challenging when we can't get the right allocation or the right solution at play. That can also be super taxing. So it's really hard, unlike a lot of jobs where you can almost kind of keep the work and the personal identity almost at arm's length. I think here it just begins to get muddled to get there, and it kind of, I think that both can be a tremendous blessing and a tremendous rewarding privilege, and also a really, really heavy burden, a very, very heavy task to carry.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. I think probably most people listening But hopefully that will continue to reach more and more people who are new to this conversations like these. But in our world, there is a concept of lived experience. And that is a term that, just like it exactly sounds, is to say the people doing the work have lived experience more similar to the people that are benefiting or being helped or trying to be served. There's also credible messenger, which is a really neat term around the people that are speaking about the problem come from it versus those outside the problem trying to come in and understand it and explain. And, and it's helpful to have more people care about things, but if they don't have any personal experience with it, we should probably stand back, and I can speak for myself, stand back and let others have the stage, the mic, and the opportunity. And that's one of the goals I have for Playful Podcasts, is to lift up the voice of others and let these conversations.
And listen, as a funder, completely agree with that sentiment. And as a funder, that's also a principle that we get to bring forward in how we execute the distribution of our resourcing, right? I think a big principle for us at Google.org is the belief that people most proximate to the problems are also most proximate to the solutions. Therefore, we have a bias towards funding organizations who are operating in spaces that are being led by the communities they're hoping to serve, right? So if it's an organization that's hoping to serve the African American community, it should be an organization that is led by, and at least in large portions be reflective of the community they're aiming to serve. Same thing in indigenous communities, women, same thing with Latinos, people with accessibility challenges, right? So I think there's a lot of how we keep that sentiment in the forefront of really centering the community we're trying to serve, and also elevating organizations that are bringing the solutions from within.
Right. Well, and it seems so obvious, and yet we know it's kind of the new thing, in philanthropy, which just seems a little crazy, but at least it's now seems like it's getting its moment, and it doesn't feel like it's a news cycle. It feels like, for at least a lot of folks, it is a new paradigm that we will close the past on the old paradigm. Okay. We have to eat ice cream before we get too much further along. So folks, you may recall that we have the What's the Scoop feature of the episode each week. And our ice cream today, it flew across country to Hector in Miami from Oakland. And for me, it flew from Oakland down to San Diego. The social entrepreneur that runs Kube Ice Cream, based in Oakland, is a wonderful woman, and it's a coconut-based ice cream. So Hector had mentioned that dairy-free would be preferred. And it's actually another guest of ours who's going to be on in a couple weeks. He was the one that turned me on to this shop. And as I just described, they sell and send nationally. So I'm grabbing my ice cream out of my little cooler. Okay, Hector, tell us what we got.
Oh, I'm ready. First of all, thank you for sending me a handful of different flavors that I've now been enjoying. And we are down to Madagascar vanilla bean, out of process of elimination, because everything else has probably been consumed in my household by now. So we have our vanilla bean Kube. Where's the front? Right there we go.
Now,
look at that.
I gotta say, I've resisted, and so I gotta ask you, how have the other flavors been?
Oh man, amazing! But I'm confident this one is going to be the best.
Okay, I'm waiting to. Okay,
there it is.
Oh wow.
There's something about the coconut that just makes the flavors stand out.
I think she even says on the website, she says full fat, which usually, we're all like running away from the word fat. Yeah, here it says, okay, Kube is a Black woman-owned vegan artisanal full fat coconut cream frozen dessert manufacturer. Locally produced coconut cream, no artificial colors, flavors, chemicals, etc. It is fantastic.
I choose to believe that this is healthy fats, only the best of fats. Right, Christine?
Yes, so good. Okay, so the other part on What's the Scoop, the play on words, is what's the scoop on how you came to care? You hinted a little bit and alluded to your childhood. I'd love to know any moments, people, or influences that gave you this world perspective about wanting to make a difference and help redress imbalance.
Listen, I think it's going to come as no surprise or little surprise to most folks that I'm going to attribute a majority of this to my upbringing and to my parents. Like I mentioned earlier, grew up in an immigrant household to Venezuelan immigrants in the outskirts of Miami. And I have just learned so much from my parents' example, from their experience, from their hustle, their grit, their passion, their optimism about life, about the world, about how to carry myself, about how to care. And that's really been what's centered my experience and most of my career, right? I think about their experience as first generation immigrants and how that taught me about risk taking. It taught me about tenacity. As people of faith, they taught me about unapologetically staying true to your convictions and your beliefs. As family-centered people, as a family-centered couple, they were caretakers and stewards not only of my nuclear family, myself, my two siblings, but like good Latinos of their extended family as well. And that didn't always mean blood relatives. That means kind of the extended tios y tias and the extended family and community, right? And they always really, really balanced family life with the needs of the community, whether that meant taking immigrant families into our home while they got up on their feet, or working with homeless individuals to help them rehabilitate, or volunteering to feed the needy people at nearby shelters. My parents really never turned down a chance to show grace to those in the margins. I really remember that being a deeply rooted value and lesson that I begrudgingly uptook as a kid, right? I remember as a young human always having strangers in our house, always being forced to go on Thanksgiving or Christmas holidays to the local shelter or the local food bank. And I would do that begrudgingly because I would think, oh, like, wouldn't it be nice to just be home and, do the things that other normal families do? And fast forward to now, I'm like, man, what an invaluable life lesson my parents were teaching me back then, right? And those experiences have really shaped my worldview and have given me a sense of social justice and altruism, which really, truly continues to influence the work I do today at Google.org and in my personal life.
I really appreciate you giving voice to the young person, teenager, because I can share with you my version of that. I walked on my first political campaign when I was 4. I thought it was when I was 8, but turns out I was 4, and my mom let me know that. So we were always doing those kinds of things, peace rallies. I was born in 64. So in 1968, my first campaign, and in 1972, we really got busy in that presidential election. But I remembered 2 things that I kind of begrudged in the moment. One was boycotting grapes. When I was a kid, we boycotted grapes as part of the farm worker protest. And, I don't know if I'm, 9, 10, 11, it's summer and I want grapes. Like all the other kids are having grapes.
Yeah.
And so that seems so silly, but it stuck with me. And here I am talking about it many decades later. It matters so much to me that we did that. And then we also sponsored a family of Vietnamese refugees who had come over, after the fall of Saigon. And I remember I'm in Southern California, going up to Camp Pendleton to the refugee camp where they were brought with our station wagon and them all piling in and then finding them a place to live. And I hear it in my voice. It's very, yeah. It really matters that we did that. And what else might have I been doing on a summer afternoon, right? And filling in. And then when we had to share, right, things of ours with them, I think on a heart level, I always knew it was good to share. But, you're a kid and you're like necessarily give your toy away or your book or have somebody sleep in your bedroom. And it was so formative. And
it is formative.
I'm so grateful. And I thank you for making space for just that little crankiness that kind of came along with it at that age. And
listen, it's real. It's real. And I think it's important for people to know that at no point, like nobody here is earning sainthood, right? Like none of us were like willing participants in this work early on. And I think it's a testament to the power of proximity and the power of perseverance in how these values and lessons on justice and belonging and equality can really transcend and transform people.
And I'm thinking, Hector, back to the comment about lived experience, because my lived experience was of privilege. If my parents hadn't engaged us in those opportunities, because then my lived experience started to include other people's stories. So I became broader focused. I could look up and see, even if I geographically hadn't traveled at that point, I was traveling through these interactions with other people and problems bigger than mine, or not necessary. I wasn't proximate to them until my parents brought them into our home, like literally and figuratively. So thank you, them. Yeah. Okay. So the buzzer went off. And so I think we should have another bite of ice cream, just because, I don't know. I feel like it's hard to just let it sit here. And then let's
I love the idea of having a timer that reminds you to have ice cream. I think we should definitely do that more, incorporate that more into our daily lives.
And I don't know, we're in different time zones right now, but this is pretty early for ice cream. But, I'm just going to pretend like it was yogurt. Oh, that sounds like breakfast.
It's never too early.
So, Hector, how can we support things or something that you're doing? What would you do? Would you guide us to go to google.org? How do you look it up? And how do we find out how we can support you in your efforts?
Listen, 3 things. 1, if you want to learn more about the work that we're advancing through google.org, going to our website, which is pretty straightforward, google.org. It's the best way to find those resources, the best way to find the tools, and the best way to find the stories and the organizations that we're elevating and supporting. And the last 2 things that I'll definitely want to elevate and mention here is 2, the community organizations that I have a chance to serve alongside of and sit on their boards: Hispanic Federation and Hispanics in Philanthropy, and the Aspen Institute's Latino Society program. Check them out. They are doing fantastic work around both frontline serving and supporting organizations that are serving communities that are being displaced, that are supporting immigrants in the border or immigrants throughout the country. They are supporting the Latino community with upward mobility, with whatever type of resourcing that is necessary to help the community stabilize and advance as a whole. So big kudos to each 3 of those organizations, and please check them out. Please find ways to support them. They're really doing transformative work. And the last reflection that I'll mention is almost an invitation for all of us to kind of lean in and celebrate and slow down and kind of celebrate the joy of play. And for me, it was really helpful to get the invitation to be on this podcast, Christine, because it also forced me to reflect on the importance of slowing down and reminding myself of the importance of play, and reminded me that to never be too much in a hurry, because we'll always run past more than what we will be able to catch up with. And the relevance and the invaluable traits that come from play, like curiosity, vulnerability, proximity, ability to think outside the box, ability to innovate, the ability to recharge, that are so important. And that also kind of reminded me of this framing that young Pueblo has in his most recent book, which is, and I'll borrow this excerpt from him, which is, in a society based on speed and productivity, moving slowly is a radical act. Oof. And I just found that to be such a powerful, profound statement around how often we get caught up in the moving fast pace because of fear of falling behind, or fear of not being able to keep up with these expectations. And most of the time, these expectations are self-imposed. Yeah. They're very much things that just exist up here in our minds, right? And we are partially motivated by what we think others are doing, what we believe others are doing, but that might not be the reality. And then collectively as a society, we create this spin wheel that's never ending and that's moving incredibly fast. And I think
if we play kind of out loud and overtly, that kind of gives permission to others to do so. They know you're a serious guy doing important work, and they saw you playing, like, right, maybe that's allowed, right? And maybe it's even essential. I love that. Oh my God, this was so fun. There you go, right? This was so fun. And we're in the midst of our days doing our change work. And this is part of it. This is not separate from that. This is part of that.
Christine, thank you so much for helping us pause and helping us lean into this radical act of slowing down. I really appreciate that.
Can't wait to see you again in person. Hope it is not too long.
All right, my friend. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much. Likewise. Bye. Stay tuned for Double Scoop, 2 delicious insights from today's episode. Hey friends, This is the double scoop after our fantastic conversation with Hector Mujica from Google.org. Two things that I wanted to highlight and lift up. One was the quote he shared with us that perhaps become a mantra, which is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And really interesting to think about. Afflict feels like a hard word when we think about afflicting others, but if the afflicting is to make the comfortable uncomfortable, which causes them to act and share some of their wealth, privilege, opportunities, ideas, inspiration, etc., with those who don't have as much and for whom some of that has been denied, let's go for it. I love that idea. And number two, we were talking about play around the world, and he said that regardless of what the play looks like itself, he thought the outcome is most often the same, that it creates community and connection. He called it proximity, making people feel close and connected, a sense of belonging. And I love that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Those are the two key points I wanted to raise up. And thanks again for listening. What a great conversation. See y'all.
Thank you for listening to the Playful Podcast with Christine Michie. If you want to stay playful as you tackle the world's problems and get all the scoop on today's tastiest ice cream, click to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can learn more about Christine on LinkedIn and her work with changemakers worldwide at impactfulinc.com. That's impactful with 2 L's, INC.com.